Welcome to this new look Premier League preview and prediction show. We are sported on our right or left. On our right, we have over here, we have Fabinho, and on our left we have Marco Arnautovic. We have the fixtures scrolling underneath, and we have a whole new setup in the background as well. I hope you really like it. But let's get straight on to the fixtures. So on Friday night, the football kicks off again. The second time it's kicked off on a Friday. First being last time when Leicester were also there. And we are having the first game at Manchester United, who will take on Leicester. There are still several players that are injured and won't be playing in this side for Manchester United. Those include Matic, Rojo, Romero and Diego Dalot. Unlikely to play Maddison, Maguire. Johnny Evans has also been out. So it looks like Lukaku will be on the bench, and that the main focal point will be like Rashford and Sanchez. In pre-season, mixed results for all. Manchester United lost to Bayern Munich, beat Real Madrid, lost to Liverpool, beat AC Milan on penalties, and drew with American sides San Jose Earthquakes and Club America. So a mixed bag there. Leicester City, they beat Notts County in their opening friendly. They drew with a side that I can't pronounce, 0-0. They lost to Udinese 2-1. They drew with Valencia at home. And in their final game, they went to Lille and won. So another mixed bag of results there. 2 defeats, 2 draws, 2 wins. And Manchester United had 2 defeats, 3 draws, including that win. You know, it's a draw. Penalties are pointless, and 1 win against Real Madrid. So it'll be interesting to see how this game goes. I personally hope it's as good as the opening game last year, where Leicester lost 4-3. It was a really good game. They took the lead a couple of times, and it was absolutely fantastic to watch. Manchester United look like they won't get a defender over the line, which is pretty sad. There'll obviously be players still coming back from the World Cup, so you know Maguire and Vardy have been at the World Cup. But having said all this, despite the animosity and the problems that have been, you know, in the newspapers and stuff, I think Manchester United will be fine here, and I think that they will win this game. I don't think that Leicester will be that strong this season. They've lost Mahrez and they brought in that Gazelle player, but yeah. So I think it will be a win for Manchester United, no doubt about it. Okie dokie. So on to Saturday, and the opening fixture, I need to turn my phone on to silent, is Newcastle versus Tottenham. This game was a fixture last year. They kicked off on the Sunday, and Tottenham won 2-0 after John Joe Shelby was sent off. No new signings for Spurs as of recording. It doesn't look like they'll get anyone over the line. Newcastle, they've signed Muto, they've signed Solomon Rondon, they've signed that lad from Deportivo La Coruña, and I think this will be quite a tight game, but I think Spurs will probably get the win. Looking at the friendly fixtures, which obviously you can't read too much in, they beat St. Patrick's 2-0. They drew with Hull, drew with Porto, lost to Braga 4-0, and lost to Augsburg 1-0. Tottenham, on the other hand, have had decent. They beat AS Roma 4-1. They drew with Barcelona and lost on penalties. They lost to Girona 4-1. I'm not sure how much of a big squad that is. And Tottenham beat AC Milan 1-0. So yeah, I expect a 1-0, 2-0 sort of victory. I think Newcastle will probably struggle just a little bit this season with goals, and I think that will cost them this time. The first 3 o'clock game we are going to, and that is Bournemouth versus Cardiff. So Cardiff have signed a lot of players from the Championship, the likes of Jacob Murphy, Cunningham, Smithies. Be interesting to see how they can adapt. Bournemouth, as of recording, have signed Jefferson Lerma in midfield. They have signed David Brooks, and they have signed Rico, who plays left back. So yeah, if we look at the pre-season, Bournemouth have been, by the looks of it, to Spain. Drew with Sevilla, beat Levante 4-3. Levante, who beat Barcelona right at the end of the season. Their only defeat, so obviously it's a friendly, so bear that in mind. 1-1 with Bristol City, a 2-0 defeat to Nottingham Forest, a 2-0 defeat to Real Betis, but they did win their final game 5-1 against Marseille. Cardiff also played Real Betis. They played a bunch of Welsh teams at the start. Tafelwell they beat 3-0. Tavistock they beat 6-0. And Bodmin they beat 11-1. And then they played Torquay, who they drew 1-1. They lost 2-1 to Rotherham. Burton they beat 5-1. And then they lost to Real Betis 2-1. Once again, I think this will be a really, really tight game. I don't think there'll be a lot in it. But if I had to put a bet on it, I'd probably go with a Bournemouth win. Maybe 1-0, but maybe a draw. Like I don't expect many goals. 0-0, 1-0, 1-1 is all I can really see. I really think it will be a very, very tight game. Now we travel to Fulham against Crystal Palace. I think Fulham will be a really, really good side this year. They won't have Alfie Mawson. He's currently nursing an injury, but they have so many players brought in that have been fantastic. The likes of Andre Schürrle, Mitrovic. They've brought in Jean-Michel Seri as well. Crystal Palace, they've been pretty quiet on the transfer front. They've signed Max Meyer, Kyoto, and they've also signed the goalkeeper as well. So we'll check out how things went for Fulham in pre-season. They beat Crawley 4-2. They drew with Reading. They lost to Fenerbahce 3-0. Lost to Lyon 4-0. Atletico Bilbao they beat 3-1. They drew with Fiorentina but lost on penalties. I don't know why everyone's having a penalty shootout at the end of these games. Sampdoria they lost 1-0 and they drew with Celta Vigo 2-0. So not a very, very good bag of results there. Crystal Palace on the other hand have done fantastic. They drew with Helsingør 2-2. They then beat Halmstad 6-1. And then they played the rest of their games in England, which is always good to see. Oxford, they beat 3-1. They beat Stevenage 2-1. Reading 4-0. They beat Boreham Wood 1-0. Crystal Palace beat Toulouse 4-1. And then finally they drew a Kingstonian 0-0. Once again, I'm not sure how accurate these, obviously I don't know which I don't know which sides played and stuff, but I'm going to go for a draw here. I'm going to go about 2 apiece, a nice open game between the sides, and I think it'll be a draw. I don't think there's a lot between the sides, and I think it'll take a while for the players to bed in that have signed from Fulham. Huddersfield entertain Chelsea in their first game, their first competitive game in the league under Maurizio Sarri. So as of recording, Chelsea have signed the goalkeeper Kappa. They have signed Kovacic, and they've also signed Jorginho. Huddersfield have also done some transfer business, including signing Terence Congolo on a permanent deal. They've signed Eric Durm. as well, and they have also signed a few others. Head to head, we'll have a look at their fixtures. So they beat Bury 4-0. They lost to Accrington 3-0. Some of these results could be the under-23, so please bear that in mind. Dresden 0-0, Betis 2-0 defeat, Bremen a 1-0 defeat, 1-1 with Darmstadt. Huddersfield then went on and beat Lyon 3-1. So those games, Betis and Bremen, for example, were played on the same day, and then there was a game the day after as well. So please bear that in mind. Bologna, they beat 2-1, and then they beat RB Leipzig 3-0. Chelsea, they've been away. They've been everywhere. So they lost to Man City in their only competitive game, obviously, which was the Community Shield 2-0. And then the rest are friendlies, including the International Champions Cup, which is a friendly trophy, isn't it? 3-0, no, not 3-0, 1-0 victory against Perth Glory in their opening game, and then they beat Inter Milan on penalties after a 1-1 draw. They lost to Arsenal on penalties after a 1-1 draw. They won against Lyon on penalties after a 0-0 draw. I think this will be tight, but I am going to go for Chelsea to get the win, maybe like a 2-1 win. I don't expect many goals here, but I think that they'll do really well here and get the victory. It's always tough going to Huddersfield, but they were really, really good when they played them last year away. They look really good. I'm not sure who will be back. I don't think Hazard will probably play. It'll be interesting to see whether Kante plays. Anyway, the next game we have is Watford versus Brighton. So Watford have signed a handful of different players from Europe, mainly from Spain. Brighton have signed a ruck of players, and it'll be interesting to see how well they gel. So they obviously have a new sort of manager. It's not a new manager, Gracia, but it is his first time really as in a transfer window. It came in right at the end of the window, so it's his first proper transfer window. But yeah, so they have brought in Ben Foster. They have brought in Ben Wilmot, who signed from where did he sign from? Some Stevenage, and yeah, here we are. I got it now. So yeah, they've signed him from Stevenage as well. Watford have also signed Delafeu, Ken Sema. They've signed Mark Navarro as well, and Adam Messina. So they've signed a ruck of players from there. Brighton have been very, very busy bees as well. Jahambach, Bissouma, Bernardo, Florin Adone, David Button, Percy Tau, who I believe has gone back out on loan, Leo Balogun, and Jason Steele with Billy Arch. So they've signed a lot of different players, and yeah, I don't know how this one will go. Friendlies, Watford, they played a 1-1 draw with Cologne, 3-1 win over Dusseldorf. Stevenage, they beat 1-0, a 2-1 win over Brentford, and a 1-1 draw with Sampdoria. Now we go to Brighton, a 1-1 draw with St Gallen, a 2-1 defeat to Wimbledon, 1-1 draw with Charlton, a 1-1 draw with Birmingham, and a 2-1 win over Nantes. So I am going to go for a Brighton win to get their first 3 points of the season, and I think, I think they'll win. Maybe 2-1, something like that. Bit of a surprise. And that is the final game of the 3 o'clocks, and then the first 5:30 kickoff is Wolverhampton Wanderers entertaining Everton. So we all know how busy Wolverhampton Wanderers have been. They have signed Adama Traore, Jota, Willy Bolly, Moutinho, Leo Bonatini, Raul Jimenez, Rui Patricio, Ruben Vinagre, and Johnny Castro. Everton have been fairly busy in the last few weeks of the window as well. It took them a while to get their first summer signing, but they did it a few weeks ago. Richarlison, Lucas Digne, and they've also signed Bernard. I think he's just doing his medical, and Yerry Mina is currently in a medical. So they'll have a few players. I don't think Mina will be ready, but I don't think maybe Bernard won't be ready either. So it's Wolves' first game at this level for a long time. So their friendlies, they beat Basel 2-1. They beat Young Boys 4-0. They drew with Ajax. Bochum, they drew 0-0. Betis, they drew 0-0. Stoke, they drew 0-0. They lost to Derby 2-1, and they beat Villarreal 2-1. So Everton's friendly form isn't very good. So they played our ATV Ernding, who play in Austria, where they won 22-0. But they didn't win another game. So they drew with Bury 1 apiece. They drew with Lille but lost on penalties. FC Porto, they played and they lost 1-0. Blackburn, they lost 3-0. Rennes, they lost 4-1, and they lost 3-2 to Valencia. So not very good form. And I think because these players might not be fit enough to play, I'm going to go for a Wolves win, maybe 2-0, and it would be a great start for Wolves' life in the Premier League once again. And then we have three games on Sunday. Southampton versus Burnley is not on the television, but the other two are. Liverpool versus West Ham. This should be a really interesting game. Liverpool have been very busy in the summer, signing Alisson for a goalkeeping record, which has now been broken. Naby Keita, they've signed Fabinho, and they've signed Xherdan Shaqiri. So they have been really busy, as have West Ham, who have signed a bunch of players from all over. They've signed Felipe Anderson, Issa Diop, Andrei Yarmolenko, Fabianski, Lucas Perez, Fabian Valbuena, Jack Wilshere, and Ryan Fredericks. Liverpool have had very good form in pre-season. They beat Chester 7-0, 3-2 win over Tranmere. They drew with Bury. They beat Blackburn 2-0. They lost to Dortmund 3-1. They beat Manchester City and Manchester United, and then they've had two great results since returning back to Europe, having a 5-0 win over Napoli and a 3-1 win over Torino. West Ham, their form, they lost to Winterthur 3-2. They went to Wickham and won 1-0. Drew with Preston 2-2. Beat Aston Villa 3-1. Beat Ipswich 2-1. Drew with Mainz, but won on penalties, and then beat Angers 1-0. I think that was for the Betway Cup. So form's decent for both sides. I just can't see West Ham beating Liverpool at Anfield here, so I'm going to go for a Liverpool win. I think it'll probably be comfortable, maybe 2 or 3-0. That's a real good game to look forward to. It might be a lot tighter than that. Second game, Southampton versus Burnley. Southampton escaped on the final day. They made themselves safe on the final day. They escaped on the Tuesday night, where they beat Swansea. Their signings include Vestergaard, El-Wanusi, Angus Gunn, Stuart Armstrong. So that are those their signings. They've lost Florian Gardos, Jordi Classy, Sofiane Boufal, Carrillo. None of these were really starters, but they did lose Dusan Tadic, who is a very good player. Friendly-wise, they drew with Schalke 3-3. They went to China and drew with Jiangsu Suning, who they beat 3-2. They lost to Derby 3-0, which is a terrible defeat. Dijon, they beat 2-0. They beat Celta Vigo 3-2 after being 2-0 down, and then they lost to Borussia Mönchengladbach. Burnley, on the other hand, how have they been doing? Well, they've had a few Europa League games to contend with, but they beat Cork 1-0. They beat Macclesfield 2-0. They beat Curzon 5-2. They played Preston and won 3-2. They drew with Aberdeen in the Europa League. They drew with Montpellier and they won 3-1 after extra time against Aberdeen to qualify for the next playoff round of the Europa League. And in their final pre-season friendly, they lost to Espanyol. I don't know how this one is going to go, so I'm going to go for a draw. I just think that Southampton aren't good enough to beat Burnley, but I don't think Burnley. I think they'll have an eye on the champions, the Europa League, because that's something that they really want to progress at. So yeah, I'm going to go for a draw. Final game, we have Arsenal and Manchester City, the champions Manchester City. So a massive change has happened over the last few months at Arsenal. Wenger has left. Unai Emery's come in, and he has got rid of several players here. Pep Mertesacker has retired. Jack Wilshere has gone. Santi Cazorla has gone. Those three were key players at a time, and they have brought in some decent players. Lucas Torreira, Bernd Leno, Socrates, Matteo Guendouzi, and Stefan Lichtsteiner. Man City, it's just a one in for them, and that is Riyad Mahrez signing from Leicester City for around £60 million. So that's a lot for him. Pre-season then, they started off Arsenal at Bournemouth where they won 8-0. They then lost on penalties to Atletico Madrid after drawing 1-1 in the ICC. They beat a very, very young PSG side 5-1. They drew with Chelsea, scoring a last-minute equaliser, and then went on to win on penalties, and they beat Lazio 2-0 in their final pre-season friendly. Let's have a look at Manchester City then. So they lost to Dortmund 1-0. They lost to Liverpool 2-1. A lot of youngsters involved in these games. They beat Bayern 3-2, where Bernardo Silva was exceptional. And then in the Community Shield, they got their act together and they beat them 2-0. They had a lot of players return for that game. I am not sure. I think Manchester City will win, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a draw for him to get his first points. But I just can't see past Manchester City here. So I'm going for a win for Manchester City. So that's all of the Premier League fixtures for this weekend. The first weekend of the season. It's going to be really good. And it's going to be a great watch. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave your predictions down below. Subscribe if you're new. And I will see you soon. And thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. And I will see you soon.